On Christmas morning in 2002, a 55-year-old contractor from West Virginia stopped at a supermarket in the town of Hurricane to buy a breakfast sandwich and fill up his truck. While he was there, he bought a Powerball ticket. A quick pick. He did not choose the numbers. The jackpot was $314.9 million. At the time, it was the largest prize ever won by a single ticket in American history. He held it up on television with his wife beside him and his granddaughter under his arm. And he said he wanted to do good with it. He meant it. Within weeks, he had given away more money than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes. 4 years later, sitting across from a reporter, the same man said this: "I wish I'd torn that ticket up." By then, his granddaughter was dead, his wife had left, his money was gone, and he had been robbed of more than $500,000 in cash while sitting in a parking lot. This is not a story about a man who was bad with money. That is the thing everyone gets wrong about it. Start with the number, because the number is a lie that almost every lottery story repeats. Andrew Jackson Whitaker Jr. did not receive $314 million. That figure is the annuity value, the total you get if you let the state pay you in installments over roughly 3 decades. Almost nobody takes it. Whitaker took the cash option, which was about $170 million, and after federal and state taxes came off the top, the amount that actually landed was around $113 million. So before he had made a single decision, before a single relative called, roughly $200 million of the headline had evaporated into the difference between how lotteries advertise and how lotteries pay. Now here is the fact that makes his story genuinely useful, and it is the fact that almost never gets mentioned. Jack Whitaker was already rich. He was the president of a contracting firm called Diversified Enterprises Construction, laying water and sewer pipe across West Virginia. The company did millions of dollars of business a year and employed more than 100 people. His personal net worth before he ever bought that ticket was somewhere around $17 million. This was not a man who had never seen money. He had built a business from nothing, met a payroll for 100 families, managed contracts, handled banks, and survived the ordinary financial violence of the construction industry for decades. If financial literacy were the protection, he had that. If experience with wealth were the protection, he had that too. He lost all of it in about 5 years anyway. So whatever destroyed him, it was not ignorance about money. It is worth staying with that $17 million for a second, because it quietly disproves the entire moral that usually gets attached to this story. A man who builds a pipe-laying business to that size in West Virginia has already survived every ordinary financial trap there is. He has been underbid, underpaid, and stiffed on invoices. He has borrowed against equipment and paid it back. He has carried 100 families through a slow winter. He knows what a lawyer costs, what a bad partner costs, and what it feels like when a check does not clear. He was not a lottery winner who happened to have a job. He was a self-made multimillionaire who happened to buy a ticket. And that is exactly why his collapse is worth studying. If the protection against sudden wealth were competence, Jack Whitaker would have been the safest winner in American history. The first thing he did was give. He pledged more than 10% of the winnings to a group of churches and put roughly $14 million into a foundation set up in his own name to handle the requests that were already arriving. He funded the construction of church buildings. He wrote checks to families in his county. He bought a house for the woman who had sold him the ticket and gave her cash on top of it, because she had been kind to him. Reporters at the time tallied the giving at more than $50 million in houses, vehicles, and cash inside the first couple of years. He was not being reckless in his own mind. He was doing exactly what most people say they would do. But something structural was happening underneath the generosity, and it is the hinge of this entire story. Jack Whitaker had accidentally become an institution, a charitable foundation, a church funder, a source of emergency housing, a lender of last resort for an entire region, run by one man out of his own checkbook, with no staff, no application process, no criteria, no board, and no way of saying no that did not feel like a personal insult from a neighbor. Real institutions have friction on purpose: forms, committees, waiting periods. People imagine that friction exists to be cruel. It does not. It exists so that the answer no can be delivered by a process instead of by a face. Whitaker had no process. Every no came out of his own mouth, to someone standing in front of him, who knew exactly how much money he had, because it had been on television. The requests did not stop. They compounded. Letters arrived by the sackful, thousands of them, from across the country. People he had not spoken to in decades reappeared. Business associates came with proposals. Strangers came with medical bills. Some of the stories were true, some were not. There was no way to tell them apart, and there was no one whose job it was to try. Think about the arithmetic of that inbox for a moment. If 10,000 people write to you, and 1 in 10 is describing a genuine emergency, then 1,000 real crises are now sitting on your kitchen table with your name on them. You cannot fix 1,000 crises. You also cannot unread them. So every single day, a man who had spent his life as a decent neighbor in a small county was required to choose which of the desperate people in front of him deserved help and which did not, using no information, no training, and no authority beyond the fact that he had bought a sandwich on the right morning. Nobody survives that role. It is not a role a private individual is built to hold. Whitaker started drinking around this time, and the two facts are not a coincidence. And then the relationship between Whitaker and the people around him quietly inverted. He stopped being a person and became a resource. You can measure the moment it turned. Over the following years, he was named in something on the order of 400 legal actions. He was sued by people who claimed he had promised them money. He was sued over incidents at businesses he frequented. He was, by his own account, spending a fortune on attorneys simply to manage the volume of claims. And he was robbed, repeatedly, and in ways that read as almost impossible. In August of 2003, less than a year after the win, a briefcase was taken from his car outside a strip club in Cross Lanes containing more than $500,000 in cash and cashier's checks. The manager of the club and his girlfriend were later charged with drugging him to take it. He was robbed at the same establishment again, of hundreds of thousands more. The obvious question is why a man carrying that kind of money kept putting himself in that position. And the honest answer is the uncomfortable one. He had started drinking heavily and gambling heavily, and the person who could have told him to stop was the person who had known him for 36 years, and she was watching a stranger move into her husband's body. But the real cost was never the cash. He had insurance against losing money. He had no insurance against what came next. Her name was Brandy Bragg. She was his granddaughter, and by every account, she was the person he loved most in the world. She was 15 when he won. Whitaker was open about the fact that he wanted her to have everything. He bought her cars, more than one. He gave her a weekly allowance reported at around $2,100, which is more than the median American household earned in a month at the time, handed to a teenager every week with no conditions attached. What happened next is not mysterious, and it is not really about her. A 15-year-old girl in a small West Virginia town became, overnight, the most financially significant person in her school. Every friendship she formed after that point carried a question underneath it that she had no way to answer. Every person who wanted to be near her might have wanted to be near her, or might have wanted proximity to the money, and she was a teenager, which means she had no instrument for telling the difference. Neither do most adults. She began using drugs. The people around her had the means to supply them without limit because she was the one paying. In September of 2004, her boyfriend was found dead in the Whitaker family home of a drug overdose. He was 18. 3 months later, in December of 2004, Brandy disappeared. She was found dead a few weeks after that, 17 years old. A toxicology report indicated methamphetamine and cocaine in her system. Whitaker told reporters afterward that he blamed the lottery. Not the drugs, not the town, not the friends. The ticket. "My granddaughter is dead because of the money," he said. After that, the story is mostly a long unwinding. By 2007, roughly 5 years after the win, Whitaker stated that the accounts were empty. Bank records introduced in one of the many court proceedings supported it. Between the giving, the lawsuits, the settlements, the thefts, the gambling, the legal fees, and the taxes he had underestimated, $113 million had run out. His home was burglarized. A property he owned burned. In 2008, after 42 years of marriage, his wife Jewel filed for divorce, and the settlement took most of whatever was left. In 2009, his daughter Ginger, Brandy's mother, died. Jack Whitaker died in June of 2020, at 72 years old. The construction company, the $17 million, the 100 employees, the marriage, the daughter, the granddaughter, and the largest single-ticket jackpot in the history of American gambling, all of it gone within 18 years of one breakfast sandwich. So what actually happened here? The easy reading is that he was a fool who blew it, and the easy lesson is, get a financial advisor. Both are wrong, and the second one is dangerously wrong because it implies the danger was in the spreadsheet. Look again at what actually killed the money. Charitable giving, legal claims from people he knew, theft by people who got close to him, support of family members, divorce. Every one of those is a relationship, not a transaction. Not one of them is a bad investment. There is no portfolio allocation that protects against 400 lawsuits, and no index fund that stops your neighbors from becoming petitioners. Sudden wealth is not a financial event. It is a social event that arrives with a number attached. What the money did to Jack Whitaker was remove all the friction from his life at once. Friction is the thing that had been quietly protecting him. The friction of having to say no because he genuinely could not afford yes. The friction of a business where money had to be earned in stages, against work, with a paper trail. The friction that had made his granddaughter's teenage social life normal-sized. Take the friction away in a single afternoon, and what is left is a man with unlimited yes, surrounded by people who now have a reason to ask, with no process standing between the two. He had spent 30 years learning to handle money that arrived slowly. Nothing in that experience prepared him for money that arrived all at once, because the skill required is not financial. It is the ability to hold a boundary against everyone you love, forever, starting immediately, with no practice. Almost nobody has that. He did not have it. And the research suggests he is closer to the rule than the exception. 3 economists once matched Florida lottery winners against each other, comparing people who won between $50,000 and $150,000 to people who won small amounts, which is about as close to a controlled experiment on sudden money as the real world allows, because who wins is genuinely random. Their finding, published in the Review of Economics and Statistics, was not that the big winners avoided financial trouble. It was that the big winners were about half as likely to file for bankruptcy in the first 2 years, and then more likely to file for bankruptcy in year 3 and beyond. The money did not prevent the collapse. It postponed it, and when those winners did file, their net assets and unsecured debts looked roughly the same as the people who had won almost nothing, a cash windfall large enough to erase every debt they had, and the median recipient neither erased the debt nor built the equity. They bought time, at full price. If that is what happens at $100,000, it should not be surprising what happened at $113 million. The people who study lottery outcomes keep finding the same pattern in the winners who survive intact, and it is not superior investing. It is anonymity, a delay before spending, and a formal structure that answers requests so the winner does not have to. In other words, they win by rebuilding the friction the money destroyed. Jack Whitaker walked into a supermarket on Christmas morning to buy a sandwich and walked out holding a piece of paper that made him the most generous man in West Virginia, and then took his family apart, in that order, in about 5 years. He kept saying the same thing for the rest of his life, and almost nobody believed him, because it sounds like something a rich man says. He wished he had torn it up. If you want to learn more about building your own financial story, the link is in the description. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe. There's a new money story every week.